Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all well. My name is Constance Miller from the GBEP Secretariat, and I'd just like to give you a little bit of technical information before we begin the webinar. So please note that all of the microphones have been muted until the discussion at the end of the webinar. However, if you'd like to ask a question during the presentations, you can write it in the chat box at the side of your screen. You can also use the chat if you're having any technical issues, and we'll try to resolve them for you. You can also raise your hand to ask a question if you'd prefer to say it out loud. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording along with the accompanying slides will be available on the GBEP website for anyone who was not able to attend. So now I'm going to pass over to Dr. Michela Morese, the Executive Secretary of the Global Bioenergy Partnership, to give a brief introduction to the webinar. Over to you, Michela.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Connie, for your intro on the technical details. And it's very important to highlight, as you were saying, that this webinar will be recorded and available on the website, also for other colleagues and experts that won't be in the position to participate in the session today live, but will be able to follow afterwards. So today is a webinar focused on successful case studies on biogas, and it's focused on Asia. So we are going through different regions. And this is this is focused on Asia. We will have a couple of very good examples from the Philippines, from colleagues from Miriam Röder from Aston University in the UK, and from Craig Jamieson from Straw Innovation Limited, focused on their current experience in the Philippines. And then we will have a presentation from Takashi Ayashi, our colleague from Japan, on the good examples from Japan on biogas. Then we will have some time for some open discussion with participants, moderated by our colleague Pham Quang Ha from Vietnam. It's our delegate from Vietnam in the context of the Global Bioenergy Partnership. And then we will have some final remarks from Constance Miller from the GBEP Secretariat, just some take-home messages from this session today. But allow me to first go through, let me see if it goes. For some reason, it doesn't allow me to go through the slides. All right. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Global Bioenergy Partnership, the partnership is an international initiative which was established in 2006. Now we have more than 80 members, between partners and observers, between governments and international organizations, and you may see them here on the screen. Well, since the very beginning, sustainability has always been considered a key important thematic area within the context of the program of work of the Global Bioenergy Partnership. Because since the very beginning, we've been aware that bioenergy may present excellent opportunities, but not without challenges. And the key aspect of foreseeing a further development of bioenergy is to look and focus with care attention to sustainability in order to try to maximize opportunities and minimize as much as possible the challenges. And with this in mind, the Global Bioenergy Partnership has developed what is the most widely recognized and agreed set of sustainability indicators for the assessment and monitoring of bioenergy sustainability. So I'm sure that all of you are familiar with the set of sustainability indicators that has been developed by the Global Bioenergy Partnership. As you may see, these set of 24 sustainability indicators cover the 3 pillars of sustainable development: environmental, social, and economic. Of course, here you may only see the titles of these indicators, but for each of these indicators, there is a huge methodology to guide the measurement of each of these aspects. The objective of these indicators has always been and is to collect data regarding the performances of the bioenergy production in a country under several aspects, environmental, social, and economic, and use these data, this information to inform policymakers in order for them to take informed decisions, in order to further adjust policies with the view to further develop the sustainability of their bioenergy sector. And also another very important aspect is that you may see that the attention is paid on an equal manner to the 3 pillars of sustainable development. So the 24 indicators are subdivided in an equal manner under the 3 pillars. And this is to highlight that sustainability can only be achieved if equal importance is paid to the 3 pillars of sustainable development. While we may see that sometimes there is much more attention on the environmental aspects, some other times on the economic aspects, while in the context of GBEP, the message is to give equal importance to environmental, social, and economic aspects. Well, this is just to highlight the fact that the Global Bioenergy Partnership has a working group on capacity building, in addition to other task forces and working groups. And in the context of these working group on capacity building, we have different activity groups on different bioenergy related thematic areas. One of these activity groups is focused on biogas, is the one highlighted in blue. And it's exactly in the context of this activity group that we are organizing this webinar today. Here it is. Well, as I anticipated at the very beginning, this webinar today is part of a series of webinars that GBEP is organizing. And each of these webinars, this is the 3rd of the series, and each of these webinars has been focused on a regional area. So the first one has been very general, but also focused on Latin America, the second one on Africa, and here today we are to talk about Asia, examples from Asia. So allow me to give now the floor to Miriam Roeder and Craig Jamieson in order to present a very good and interesting case study from the Philippines. Miriam, Craig, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela. Let me just get my screen up here. Hopefully you can see that full screen now. Yes, as Michaela said, we're focused as well on as with GBEP, on the sustainability pillars of economic, environmental, and social sustainability. And we're going to go into those in a little bit more depth, but I'm going to first give you an overview of rice straw and its potential for biogas. Asia generally has the greatest potential and the lowest cost potential for biogas production in the world. And rice straw is one of the largest biomass feedstocks, potentially. I say potentially because there's issues with getting it out of the field. Those issues of collecting the straw are so severe that it's often ignored in biomass resource studies. We've been pioneering some work to help unlock that huge resource by overcoming that challenge of collecting it and using it for clean energy. So here's the overview of rice straw itself. What is the issue with it? For every ton of rice that is produced, there's a ton or more of straw. And these combine harvesters, as you see in the bottom left, are generally coming in and harvesting the rice, but that's all they do. They don't do anything with the straw. In fact, they create a mess behind them. This is what a field looks like after those harvesters. They just have a high stubble and trash all over the place, and it's a nightmare to try to collect or do anything with that straw. So what we do is, what most farmers do rather, is that they just burn it. just put a match to the field. That's the quickest way to clean the field and get their crops, soil ready for the next crop. Obviously, that is causing a major crisis with local air pollution. The other alternative is to plow it into the field, but in flooded rice fields, that's going to release a lot of methane and not do the crops much good. So that leads to rice being the largest emitter of all crops by a long way. In fact, you can see from that red bar at the bottom, it's largely methane, and it's responsible for about 48% of all crop emissions is just coming from rice. That's 1 gigaton of CO2 equivalent per year, which is about the same as the entire aviation industry combined. Those are the emissions from rice production, largely because of the straw and mismanagement of the straw. So let's see what that looks like from satellite. Here's North India, and those little red dots in the top left are rice fields that are being burnt, and that smoke you can see is traveling down with the trade winds down to Delhi, which already has enough smoke as it is, and causing a major crisis in health, billions of dollars every year. What are they doing? I'm going to look at India just to begin with as a little bit of a case study before we go, because we're building on what they've done. They are in many ways pioneers in this whole area of managing rice straw, because they have the most obvious problem with it. Zamindra Farm Solutions is one company and a business model. They use standard technologies, mostly behind track, that they rent out to local farmers and entrepreneurs, and they come in with a 4-step process of chop the straw to get it down to ground level so there isn't that high stubble. Secondly, they rake it into a row. Thirdly, they bale it, and fourthly, they come in with another tractor and collect those bales and take them away. It's energy intensive, it's a multi-step process, it's not all that efficient, but it works, and it gets rid of the straw. One company that is using straw in the Punjab is Samper and AgriVentures, who are making biogas from it, and they are the pioneer globally of the commercial scale gas company in the world. Rice straw is the main feedstock, and it's challenging, but they have a wet anaerobic digestion process and a 1 megawatt power plant. I say it's challenging because it takes a long while to break down, so they've got a pre-treatment that opens it up mechanically. So we thought, having studied this, and I led a team at the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines for a 3-year study, looking globally at what's going on with rice straw and how it could potentially be used for bioenergy instead of being wasted. At the end of that, I've been working with Miriam Roda, and we just said, look, maybe we can start something up that would be a better case study in the Philippines to show how this could be done more efficiently. And that is, on the left, a field with that high stubble that I was talking about, the normal one. And then this on the neighboring field is one that we've harvested with a suite of innovations that we are developing and looking to patent in some cases, to harvest and remove the straw at the same time. So instead of hiring out machines, we're trying to make the whole system more efficient and incorporate it into the harvesting service. So the farmers will pay for harvesting their rice anyway. We add to that the free straw removal to save them getting a fine from the local government for burning it. One of the local farmers gave us this quotation saying to us that this harvester is different to the conventional ones. It can help us to prepare the land more easily for the next crop. Unlike before, I would recommend this to other farmers. And when we've collected that, we take it to our processing plant, bioprocessing hub, where we develop and process the straw and the grain together. The straw goes into these balloon type anaerobic digesters. They're dry anaerobic digesters and a low cost system. And then the gas from that is processed and goes to dry the rice. So it's a nice circular system. It's all about making the rice system more efficient and eco-friendly. And we have a low-cost processing hub here, which we've just developed now in this current project. You can see the green box on the left is a combined heat and power system left over. It's an old one. And that waste heat is going to that brown box, which is a small dryer. And those IBC tanks on the right are filtering there, stripping and cleaning up the gas ready to go into that. And that whole system, I think, costs about £1,000 or less than $2,000 anyway, without the combined heat and power. We're not sure about the electricity. In the Philippines, there is this quirk that it has the second highest electricity costs in Asia. And so electricity, a need there for green low-cost electricity. But the way solar is going, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to compete with that. In fact, solar and wind are expected to become at some point even cheaper than the transmission costs alone of centralized power generation. So we're looking more at primarily at the heat. If you don't have a heat demand, then you probably wouldn't be doing this in the first place. So our research questions are, and the heat, by the way, is replacing kerosene, which is what's usually used for drying rice. That's a much higher value energy product. So our research questions are: one, can these innovations that we have make it economical without subsidy? And then secondly, what are the non-market benefits that aren't captured in that, like the greenhouse gas savings? In particular, can we do this whole system with less than 2% of the methane escaping? Because if not, then that's going to really hurt it. So greenhouse gas savings, what are they? And what are the socio-economic impacts? And that's a nice segue onto our next speech, which is from my colleague Miriam, who's been looking at those things, and particularly the socio-economic impacts and the business models and those farmers that I mentioned earlier. So I'll pass over to Dr. Miriam Roda.
Thank you, Craig. So I'm Miriam Roda from Aston University and the Energy and Bioproducts Research Institute. And I will take you more on the research side of the project, because Craig and I have been working together for a very long time. I can't even remember how long, because it has been so long. And I think our work is also a really good example of a industry-academic relationship, because we both kind of like inspire each other. And while Craig is the mastermind behind actually putting things into practice, we support it through our research to ensure it is sustainable, providing independent evidence on what he's doing, what helps him to justify what he's doing and to also ensure it is sustainable, and us obviously on the research side to create new knowledge and understand how these processes happen. So one part of the research I've been doing was looking into developing business models which are co-designed with the communities, because that's I think when you work, especially in the global south, or I think it's the same when you work wherever in the world and do bioenergy or do an energy transition, you need to work with a community to really understand not just the supply side, what can be done, but what is actually needed by the communities. What do people need, and how can you get people involved to ensure decision-making through communities to allow ownership and participation. So the idea really was to understand the trade-offs on synergies in the system across all sustainability categories and enable the positive trade-offs. Craig, can you move to the next slide, please? So as part of the research, we did loads of interviews and focus groups with local farmers in the Philippines. And what is really important is not just going and asking them questions and getting some answers, but take this knowledge away, process it. So what we did, we spoke to farmers about the energy demand, their farming practices, their ideas about what you could do with straw, but also their understanding what their need is to help them with their farming practices, but also with energy access. So we took these results away and did some assessments, designed a few business models, went back to the farmers and then discussed the business model with the farmers, which already allowed at that stage that the farmers could see that their ideas got included in our research before we come up with final ideas, what actually could be done. And they also could see through the process that their ideas they gave or they communicated to us got partly picked up by Craig in how he designed and developed his business on the ground. So Craig, could you go to the next slide, please? So as Craig said, when we started the project, most of the straw got just burnt in the field, and the agricultural authorities in the location tried to encourage farmers to incorporate the straw to stop burning, but farmers found that really difficult because that costs extra labor. That also blocks up the fields for the next crop because they have 2 crops a season, so it's really difficult to have old straw left in the field plowed in. So we asked the farmers, okay, what would be ways of dealing with that, or how, if we take away the straw and do bioenergy, how would you like to use that bioenergy? And we came up with 4 ideas, which was around, we produce just biogas, the farmers can take it back to their households and use the biogas for cooking, for their energy demand in the households. Another scenario was something like a fuel station where farmers can come to the site and maybe, because we had a CHP on site, charge a mobile phone, charge a battery, maybe even have devices where they can use the biogas, a bit like a traditional fuel station where you go and you can fuel something or you can charge something and get some kind of like buy some products. Another idea was a microgrid, which is more used for productive uses, for drying, for running pumps and so on. And another one was what we call the mushroom franchise. The idea behind it really is to have value-added products. And because you can grow mushrooms on the straw, which is another income source, and for farmers, if they use the straw also for growing mushrooms, and then use the biogas to actually process the mushrooms, dry the mushrooms, maybe make mushroom burgers and sell them. And we went, Craig, to the next slide, please. So we took these business models and tried to understand how they work and how they change specific sustainability aspects in terms of who is benefiting, how does it affect the environment, how does it affect the economics? And obviously each business model will have different outcomes. And I think that's really important because often if you speak to policymakers, they see bioenergy as a thing like solar and wind, and they just think like it generates energy, in most cases then electricity. But obviously it has so many more benefits, and we wanted to really understand what are the benefits, what are also the risks, and how do they change? If you change one bit in your system, it will change other effects or other impacts in the system as well. And really understanding not just the sustainability as such, but also the beneficiaries in the system. So who's actually benefiting from what, and how can people, for example, also participate? Because obviously if you do productive uses, you have maybe less participation opportunities for farmers, while if you do something like the mushrooms, you have a much bigger participation of farmers, but it might cost more. And really understanding kind of like these links in the system. Craig, next slide, please. So we took these business models, went back to the farmers and really wanted to understand what do they think of them. And if you work in developing context, often programs are designed to, yes, let's do energy access, and farmers or communities will take it. But it was really interesting to see when we suggested to the farmers, we just do biogas, you can take it home and cook, and they were like, oh, that's not really what we want to do. This is something you could do if you're really in a region where you have absolutely no energy access. Maybe people are interested. Oh, we're much more interested in kind of like participating in the economy and participating in the supply chain. So they found it much more interesting around the microgrid, that the opportunities that they can dry their rice in a much more sustainable way. And they all loved the idea about the mushroom growing because they said, well, that gives us actually additional income. That diversifies what we do, because at the moment we only do rice production. And this is just almost, it's more than subsistence farming, but it's not much more money than the rice. But if we also could do mushrooms and could use kind of like the biogas concept to on the back grow mushrooms on it, that would be much more beneficial for us. And I think that's a really important discussion to understand what farmers want and stepping outside the idea that bioenergy is just bioenergy, because it's so much more. Okay, Craig, next slide, please. And we also wanted to see how that relates to the different aspects of sustainability. So environmental, economic, and social. And this, I'm not going into the detail with the graph, but what it showed us, obviously, if farmers do what they currently do, which is just burning the straw, it's cheap. As soon as you go into bioenergy, it becomes more expensive. But obviously the environmental benefit is much higher. But it also means, from an economic point of view, that the financial risk is much higher, which shows what Craig said earlier: can we do biogas without subsidies? And we often see, well, we can't do. And then the question also is, why should we? There's so many systems supported by government and decision makers, and also so many systems where people think it's worth actually investing in, which are beneficial. And our idea behind this really is to understand, how does it benefit? What are the co-benefits of bioenergy? And we could see it creates new jobs, it gives additional income. So why just considering the capex and opex of a system when it can have so many more benefits? Okay, Craig, next slide, please. So really, just to sum up, from our side, it's really important to understand the stakeholders and include the stakeholders in the whole process, from the start of having a project idea to actually putting it into practice. And we feel that engaging with the farmers more closely really helps to get an in-depth understanding of the needs and perception of the community. Because you can go in there and say, like, yes, you need to reduce emissions wherever you go in the world. And then it might be really hard to get that change within a society, that people really change. So you need to understand, what are people willing to do and what are not, and how you can help them to actually come to that change. So not forcing them from one system to another, but really working with them to help them to have more sustainable systems in place. And you always have to be aware, if you do something different in your system, if you tweak your business model, it will change the dynamics within the system, and you need to be aware of them to ensure you're not triggering any negative impacts, or you try to mitigate negative impacts. And that means you really need to understand the interfaces between different aspects. And again, I'm coming again to people, because bioenergy is not just technology. You really need to understand the trade-offs for the different actors. Who are actually the beneficiaries? Who are the participants? And how can you make sure you reach the people you want to reach? Okay, that's from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Miriam, for this presentation. And I have to say that it was extremely interesting and extremely real, because we see real cases. I mean, people like the farmer that was shown on the screen before. Craig mentioned that. I mean, it's 20 years that she's a farmer in the rice straw, and she's appreciating a different methodology of reusing straw, and it would be excellent, the opportunity to have the use of biogas for other additional products, as Miriam was mentioning. I mean, the mushroom, for example, cultivation. So it's always good to make best use of the additional energy which is produced, in order to make sure that additional products, byproducts, are produced. So thank you so much, really, for this excellent good example from the Philippines. And now let's go to Japan. Still in the Asia region, we have a A good example from Japan, exploring sustainable biogas systems in the country from Takashi Ayashi from the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries of Japan. Takashi, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Just try to share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, just if you could put in presentation mode.
Okay. Okay. My name is Takashi Hayashi, working for Policy Research Institute, Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery, Japan. And today I'd like to talk about the Japanese biogas systems. And part of this presentation is already presented in Bioenergy Week we held in Manila 2 years ago by Dr. Asahi. And today I add some new information on that. And first of all, I'd like to talk about the biogas development history in Japan. And the first construction boom was started in late 1990s, and that was triggered by the Kyoto Protocol to reduce greenhouse gas emission in 1997. In addition, the Manure Management Act for appropriate manure treatment is enacted in 1999. And in 2002, we published the Biomass Nippon Strategy, which is a national strategy to promote the utilization of the biomass for energy and material. And after 10 years since the first construction boom, the second one is coming from the 2010s. And that was triggered by the, the disaster at the Fukushima nuclear power plant. And in that period, the strong worry about the nuclear power and public concern about that use. And public interest over the renewable energy has steadily increased. In light of this, the government introduced a feed-in tariff scheme for renewable electricity in 2012. And in this scheme, a fixed purchase price for 20 years for biogas and biogas generated electricity. The price is 39 Japanese yen per kilowatt hour, and which is very expensive compared to the conventional electricity and other renewable energies. In addition, we have some various subsidy schemes available for the biogas plant construction for dairy farmers. But unfortunately, currently, the second boom has almost calmed down due to following two reasons. One is a capacity limit for the power grid to sell the electricity using a feed-in tariff scheme. And the other is construction cost is skyrocketing in Japan. So now I'd like to talk about the major biogas plants in Japan. The dairy farming is mostly popular in either the northern part or southern part of Japan. So I'd like to talk about two biogas systems based on the biogas. One is a livestock manure based, and the other is a kitchen waste based. Then the first one is the livestock manure based biogas plant owned by farmers. This is the system of the biogas plant owned by one single farmer in Shihoro town, which is located in the northern part of Japan. This owner, Mr. Sasaki, now raising the nearly 400 number of cattle, and the manure input is 32 ton per day. And biogas generated from this manure is nearly 1,500 cubic meter per day. And power generation from this biogas is 3,000 kilowatt hour per day. And the system is mostly same as normal conventional biogas system, but the scale of this farm is one of the largest scales in Japanese dairy farming. These are the pictures of the Sasaki farm, and you can see the livestock barn is very large, and you can see in the you can see in this picture, the livestock manure is collected using a barn scraper and put into the manure pit, then transported to the biogas plant in here. Then the biogas is generated in the gas holder, then generate both and heat and electricity. And then some part of the heat and electricity is used for in the farm. In this farm, the automatic milking system and automatic feeding system is installed, and then electricity is consumed in these facilities. And some part of the electricity is also sold to the electricity company, and they are gaining some additional income by selling the electricity. The second one is biogas plant, which is based on the livestock manure, but this plant is owned by multiple farmers. In this case, 2 farmers are co-owned. Both farmers are raising the cattle, and their scale is much smaller than first one. These 2 farmers, Mr. Kawaguchi and Mr. Yamaguchi, co-own the biogas plant, but the plant itself is installed in the farmyard in the Kawaguchi farm. So these 2 farmers are located separately, and the distance between the farms are nearly 4 kilometers. So Mr. Yamagishi has to transport livestock manure to Kawaguchi farm, and it contracted to some third parties, and then put into the biogas plant. The digestate from this biogas plant is also returned to the Yamagishi farm and applied to the farm pasture land owned by these 2 farmers. Then the third one is the biogas plant owned by a municipality, which is located in the Shikaoi town, the adjacent city or adjacent town of the Shihoro town. In this municipality, they consider that the proper treatment of the livestock is fundamental for the promotion of the dairy farming. And the municipality should take care of it, just like the collection of the municipal garbage from household. So this municipality has owned and operate 2 biogas plants in this town. One is a Nakashikawa plant, and the other is Urima plant. And Nakashikawa plant is in operation since 2007, and the new one, Urimaku plant, is in operation since 2016. The total electricity sales is 617 gigawatt hour. Then this amount of electricity covers nearly 70% of the electricity consumed in the town. And heat is used in the plant itself, and also used for the raising of surgeons and mangoes in the nearby facility in the plant. These are the pictures of the plants. This is an older one, Nakashikawa plant, which is in operation since 2007, and this is a new one, operating since 2016. And the livestock manure from the farmers in the town is collected using this truck, then put into the biogas plant. and digestate from the plant is applied to the farmland in the town, not only the pasture land, but also the arable land. And heat generated here in the used in the greenhouse to raise mango. And in Japan, mango is mostly harvested in May or June before summer. But in this facility, mango is harvested in winter season to sell them much more higher price. In addition, the biogas is also used to extract the hydrogen, although this is still experimental stage, and then hydrogen is used for the vehicle fuels. This is still experimental. Then we move on to the kitchen waste-based biogas plant owned by municipality. These two cities and towns and cities are located in the southern part of Japan. And these two cities are located closely. And the population in Oki town is 40,000, and Miyama city has 62,000, much more larger than Oki town. And these two towns, mostly similar system, biogas system is installed. And material input is the kitchen waste, human manure, and sewage sludge, and food processing waste. And all generated electricity is consumed in the plant and not sold outside. And digested is applied to the farmland in the town. And in Myanmar case, the digest is very popular, and supply is under demand. These pictures are for the biogas plant in Myanmar city. And you can see in the center picture, the house kitchen waste from household is collected using trucks and such in the buckets. And the kitchen waste is put into the biogas plant manually. This is because they have to pick up some strange objects like metals, plastic, and woods, and so on, then put into the biogas plants. Then digestate is transported to farmland in the city using these trucks. And in addition, residents are also available the digestate for gardening in their house yard and with free of charge. Then you can see this example of the biogas plant in Japan. There is many stakeholders related to the biogas plants. In some cases, for the municipality-owned garbage waste, and these are the residents also can be the stakeholders of the biogas systems. So widespread of the biogas system requires good collaboration among stakeholders, but perception gap may become a constraint for that. So understanding how stakeholders see the plant, the system is very important. So in our research, we analyze the similarity and differences in the perception by using a SWOT analysis. So we are using a case study of the Shihoro town in Hokkaido. We have interviewed in total 22 stakeholders in winter 2006 to 2017. Among the 22 stakeholders, 7 dairy farmers and 7 arable farmers, and 8 non-farmers, which constitute of the farmers, cooperative staffs, engineering company staffs, and municipality staffs, and the consultant and the researcher. The interviewee were asked to identify and list the variables that are important for following two key questions. One is what do you expect from the biogas systems, and the other is what are the barriers and the drivers for an expansion of the biogas system in Shihoro town. The variables are organized by SWOT and strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats. Then citation frequency of the variables are compared among different stakeholders, dairy farmers, arable farmers, and non-farmers. The results shows that the dairy farmers and non-farmers focusing on the input side of the business. That means that they focus on how they enhance the productivity of the biogas plants, but they don't see much on the out of the side, which means the digestate use. But the arable farmers, they expressed their hesitation to accept digestate as an input. They don't see the digestate as an appropriate fertilizer due to several technical and non-technical constraints, like application timing is limited and the quality is unstable and limited knowledge and practices to apply the digestate as a fertilizer. In Japan, current energy policy, such as the feed-in tariff scheme and other construction subsidies, there may be the incentive to the dairy farmers to increase the number of animals to produce more livestock and manure to increase the turnover. And but these factors may be further further environmental risk may occur when proper handling and management of the digestate is missing. So energy policy must be implemented in cooperation with agri-environmental policies related to digestate use. So we now look for the new possibility for the digestate use. One of the example is bioconcentrated liquid fertilizer, BioCLF. These are the nitrogen and phosphorus and kali are extracted from the digestate. Then now this is still under the R&D development stage, and this is conducted by the Professor Yabe in Kyushu University. You can see this picture, and the digestate is black colored and has a very strange odor. On the other hand, the BioCLF is very clear, and there is no strange odor, so it can be applied to even in the greenhouse. So we have some advantages for the BioCLF. One is adjustable NPK balance depending on the soil and soil condition and crops. And also for the biogas plant, it can reduce the capacity of the digestate storage tank due to concentration of the digestate. And also some other advantage we have, but it is still had challenges. One biggest challenge is cost. Cost is too high to apply normally in the farm. It is a very big challenge for the this BioCLF. So I'd like to wrap up my presentation, and the bioenergy policy is not stand-alone and should be implemented in cooperation with the agri-environmental policies, particularly for the biogas and digestate use. And because the biogas plants require the feedstock, for example, livestock manure and kitchen waste, and necessarily generate a digestate. So input and output is important for the sustainable biogas systems. So now in Japan, the policy is still biased for the output side. But we should more focus on the output side, which means the digestate use using the agri-environmental policies for the sustainable biogas systems. Finally, for further information, we have already published this result in the bioenergy GBEP report and some papers which is published in 2009. So I'd like to welcome and take a question, and thank you for the listening, and I welcome some discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Takashi, for this very interesting presentation. And I have to say that these two presentations really give the idea of the flexibility that biogas presents in terms of feedstock to be used. So we've heard different kinds of feedstocks from the first example in the Philippines, and then from the examples in Japan. We've heard about different possible sizes of the plants at the farmer level or at the municipal level. And we've heard about different final uses of the biogas once produced. So really, these two examples, these two presentations gives an idea of the variety of use, development of biogas, so of the flexibility of having biogas being produced. Now we have some time for some questions and answers, and these part of the session will be moderated by our colleague Pham Quang Ha from Vietnam. So Ha, I give the floor to you for a question and answer short session. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you, Craig, Mijam, and Takashi. I think that like Michelle raised some issue. It's quite interesting that we have a different experience from Philippines and also from Japanese with different skins, and I think it's different technology with different needs from the farmer, from stakeholders. We don't see any policy output and or incentive from Philippine case. This is my question to Greg and Ms. Rams. If you have another question, please raise the hand or directly speak to the floor to speaker. Thank you.
Do you want me to comment on that? In the Philippines, there is a feed-in tariff for renewable energies. Most of them are used for solar and other ones, but in the case of biomass, there is still scope for developing projects in bioenergy that would attract that feed-in tariff, that would make it more economically attractive. That is just for electricity, though. And as I said, we're mainly focused for the long term on the heat for the drying of the rice, if nothing else.
And maybe to come on in that as well, because we work a lot in the policy arena and looking into it in each country we're working in. And you will see in all the countries that very different approaches on policy and how different policies enable bioenergy or sometimes not enable bioenergy. And I think the big challenge really about bioenergy, which is not enough addressed by governments in many countries, is that bioenergy sits across many different departments. And you're not just having, you're not just talking about bioenergy in terms of energy. So no, it's not just energy departments. It's also about innovation and development. It's also about agriculture. It's about waste management. It's about forestry. And I think it's also our responsibility as actors in the field of bioenergy, but also as researchers, to show these synergies and how important it is to understand how bioenergy plays a role in different policy departments. And I mean, a good example in the UK, bioenergy sits with a department of business, environment and innovation. And it has a very strong focus on climate change, but also the Department of Agriculture looks into it and supports it, but in their way, which focus much more on the feedstock production or everything related to agriculture. In Germany, lots of bioenergy policies have been very much focused on agriculture and kind of like in the early 2000s backfired And because what farmers then did, and were encouraged to just grow crops for biogas applications, and then realized, oh, we're actually losing our sustainable rotation practices. And then the government stepped back and changed policies and restructured it. And I think because policies are usually dynamic, but unfortunately they're dynamic or flexible related to changes in government. So the long-term effects are usually missing. And I think that's what we need, to have this kind of like long-term thinking, which reduces some of the uncertainties, but also allows enough flexibility to bring in technical innovation in societal changes as well, understanding what are the needs. And obviously we're talking, I mean, we're just before COP26. It's also about climate change and how it can reduce emissions. But if we go to the developing countries, it's also about how to enable and develop economies there. So it's kind of like finding this balance and understanding it really in the context, not just kind of like saying there's one specific policy for bioenergy. I think it needs to be seen in the bigger picture.
Okay, thank you. I think that we don't have a lot of time, so two issues important that we'd like to draw from this discussion. The first one is what's the barrier to scale up the good cases, the good lessons that we learn from different countries in Asia or also in Africa. The second is what is the new policy in the future? In my so please focus on that. But in my view, biofuel, biogas is in the past story. It's not hot issue now. Like the case Takashi says that Japanese have policy since 97, since Kyoto stories. That means 15 years ago. In Vietnam case also, we have different policy about the ethanol 5, ethanol 10. The case in America Latin, the case in Philippines and Thailand. So, but now people talk less. In case of Germany, people talk more about the biogas economy, and now people talk more about the circular economy. And I am agree with Mr. Gam that in case of agriculture sector, from FAO and from agriculture sector, we talk about bioenergy or biogas to solve the question of management with waste from agriculture. That means how use right straw indifferently, how use manure or chicken manure, things like that. That how to involve in that question. So I would ask Tashaki, if you have the case for the mixed farmer, the farmer they use both together between agriplant and both I mean dairy livestock, because in that case they can convert. They have no conflict between I mean their target, the farmer target. Okay, so the floor to you, up to you.
Okay. Now in Japan, we are now most of the biomass bioenergy is dominated by the biogas and the wood energy. Biofuel is very minor, mostly the imported from Brazil, US, and so on. So most of the bioenergy in Japan is related to the agri-environment and the forest policy. So in this case, as I mentioned in my presentation, there is many stakeholders, but they don't see bioenergy is important for the business because for the even in the forest wood bioenergy, they are not forest profitable in main business, which means that timber production and so on. So they don't see their resource they have is not profitable for their business. And also you can as I explained even in the dairy farmers, they don't see digested as an important thing, and even not in the farmers for arable farmers. So we have to change their mind using policies. So just this spring, we have published a new strategy for the promoting the agri-environmental policy in Japan. In this strategy, we are now declaring 25% of the agricultural products is related to the organic one. So very, very challenging and big target. So we now gradually move to the bioeconomy and the biomass-related society in Japan. And I believe that in Japan, the biomass and the bioenergy is more and more important in the future, even in Japan.
Thank you. Do we have some intervention from other people? For the election from Philippines, we think that the need of farmer is important. We should make farmer understand what they can do, and we should fit their needs, of course. And in case of Japan, they are thinking more about how they have more money from business model. Please correct.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Miriam, as she said, has been working with the local farmers in our case since the beginning. They've been at the forefront of what we're doing, asking them what they're doing with the straw, what their energy needs are, what they think of the business model. And it's been shaped through the farmers very much. In terms of scaling up, I'm quite commercially focused. We, for our part, have to make the system more effective, more cost efficient. I don't believe in just going to the government and saying, pay us to do this at any cost. You know, we need to make it cost effective as much as we can. But where there are market failures, where there are unrewarded benefits to society, we would like to see that rewarded. I've seen it said that studies showing that biogas per unit of carbon saving costs about the same as wind. But because it's the electricity or the energy use you can sell more than the emission savings, it makes a difference. So policies to reflect the non-market benefits would help, and also policies that don't contradict each other. In the Philippines, we have this incentive to help farmers to add value or gather more value from their crops. They give out free combine harvesters to some groups of farmers, but they're the wrong kind of combine harvesters. They leave the straw in the field, and then they've got other policies to stop farmers from burning the straw, and then they've got other energy policies. You know, it would be nice to see them more joined up, and that's one of the things that will be an output from this project that we're doing, to give recommendations to government on how they could improve that.
And
okay,
coming in on that is also, I mean, our project over the last few years has been supported by the UK government ODA funding, and I think it shows how these funding streams actually can enable and are important for getting some very risky business on the ground and testing it and seeing how it can benefit. And as Craig said, I think the co-benefits of bioenergy are so important and often overseen. And it's just, you know, it's not about how much costs your unit of energy. It's how many jobs are created. How does it actually benefit farmers? What are all the knock-on effects? And maybe coming back also, serving or helping to meet the demands of the farmers. I think it's also important to see where farmers having unsustainable practices, or end users of energy having unsustainable practices, and then what's actually needed to get to the change. So it's not just about, oh, they want this and this and this, and we try to make it fit. It's also using our knowledge about sustainability and how we see how systems perform to help them to improve their sustainable practices.
Okay, I think that it's more clear that when we can talk to farmer, what we should talk to them, what you need. But if we are facing one policymaker, what we should talk to them to convince us that we should scaling up the models.
But we speak to policymakers in the same, so we haven't just spoken to farmers in the Philippines, we spoke to all kind of stakeholders. I focused on the farmers here, and we've spoken to local policymakers, we have spoken to the people on the national government in the Philippines. And what you usually get, they say like they get the point, they understand it, and they say it's important. Obviously, you have all these kind of like structures and governance levels in the background. And yes, policymakers are very important, but I think communities can make a lot of decisions themselves to bring in practices to change behavior. And that's what we usually call the multi-level governance framework, to really understand what is happening at different levels of governance and how can you enable people to do something. And then you might have much more a bottom-up approach, so that policymakers see, oh, this actually works on the ground. Obviously, often you need to support to start doing this. So it's not just, I mean, sometimes you have a critical mass and it's happening by itself.
Good. That means that we have policymaker to fix the need of community.
No, I think it needs to be a dialogue between policymakers and communities, and policymakers need to also engage with the communities, talk to communities and see what they can do, what support they need to develop, and not just kind of like think like, oh, this is our national targets and that's where we want to go. No, that never works. We see it in many countries. I don't want to name any countries here, but we see it in many countries where we have secular governments doing that.
So, Connie, you will talk, inform me what time you should stop. Another question. If we are facing one side, the scientists, what we should talk to them? Scientists.
Well, maybe Craig wants to say why we should talk to scientists, because he's talking to scientists a lot.
Okay, great.
No,
because
I think
you see, in our case, we make a proposal, some research, something like that. They ask us, what is the new idea in the concept?
Well, I mean,
what is new?
Well, the point is that obviously, if you work with scientists from academia, and I'm talking here quite out of our own interest, but our research is independent. I mean, Craig can come to me with ideas, and I will fire back something at him, and we have done that in the past. Where I say like, yeah, but this might not be the right way. And if you look at the evidence, it's showing something different. And the role of the scientist really is, because we have the knowledge and we have the education and we know how to use methods and how to do these things, to do our jobs. It's part of it. You know, you're not having a society just of one type of
more extension work. Okay.
Well, and it's about applying our knowledge and methods and our ability to have funding to look into things in a maybe a slightly different context than just the commercial context. And obviously, you know, we have laboratories and can do testing. Industry can't do, and that helps then industry that they can tap into these resources, which are usually publicly funded, to help them to develop and with their innovation. And I think these scientific industry partnerships are massively important, because both sides learn so much from each other. And obviously there's nothing more beautiful for scientists than seeing how research helps to put something into practice and not just generating new knowledge and being really smart and then it sits in a journal.
Okay. Good.
Maybe,
good.
But I want maybe Craig has
now we ask the intervention of Craig, please.
Okay, well, there is what you might call, or what Bill Gates might call, a sort of a gap between what is currently economical and what needs to be done. There's a sort of a gap between those two which Bill Gates calls a green premium. And so you can either continue subsidizing inefficient ways of doing things, or you can do R&D that will help you to get to something that is more long-term sustainable. And that's where government funding comes in. That's where industry and research collaborations can come in. And I think one of the things I like about the way the UK has funded this is that they have a budget for climate change. They have a budget for ODA, for development in the global south. They have budgets for business and entrepreneurialism, and they have budgets for science. And they just thought, why don't we put all these together and have multiple benefits from one project? And the collaborations there, as Miriam said, are what help the whole thing to work together much, towards the same thing. It's applying the science and it's getting it out there. In our case, Miriam's work and our other academic partners, University of the Philippines, they're doing greenhouse gas studies, they're doing social science. And when we go to the government and say, this is what we found, it has extra credibility, because they're not going to say something because I'm twisting their arm. I don't try to twist their arm. We want something that's independent and credible, that gets the message across. And so the two working together really have that strong win-win positive benefits.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's also a responsibility because most of the academic funding or research is funded by the taxpayer. So it gives the taxpayer actually something back.
Okay.
It's just not paying academics, but it helps the wider society to really applying the knowledge we generate in academia. And we need industry for that. And we need the society for that to help us, to tell us what is needed.
Thank you. Takashi, do you have some intervention now?
Yeah. I'm in the position of the both in the policy maker and the researcher. So the policy maker should persuade the farmers that they have to promote the biogas and the bioenergy, because under the background of the sustainable development goal and the green economy and so on, the society is changing drastically. So we have to persuade the farmers to introduce much more bioenergy. But to persuade them, we need some evidence how they change, how the society change in the future, and what is the consequences introducing for farmers to introduce the bioenergy more, much more. So we have some different roles among the different stakeholders. So we have to understand what we have, we should do under the roles provided from the society. So my role is both promoting, persuading farmers to promote the biogas and providing the evidence to persuade them.
Okay, I think that we are in uncertainty time. A lot of things in change, maybe into, because when problem COVID is almost solved, somehow better than now. GBEP do a lot of things and good thing about formulate 24 indicator about the economic, social, and the environment. So I would ask Michela to revise and to rethink if we can change the different, I mean, proportion of this indicator, because something is more important than the other, I think. About business model, maybe they should try the indicator about the environment. But for the farmer, the question is more important than economic and social, thing like that. A lot of thinkers now they are thinking how to solve how to see the question of how to farm in the future in 15 years, because really we are facing in equivalent of the social and economic sector about the use of fuel and about too much waste, about too much emission, things like that. So we do hope that Michelle Lai and Connie can populate the new thing for our group. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much for moderating the discussion, and I let the discussion go on a little bit longer, really for that reason, because it was very interesting to hear you discuss between yourselves also the different roles of the policymakers and the researchers, and I'm glad that you mentioned the indicators, and I'd like to gently disagree with you on the different levels of the indicators in terms of the different pillars, because indeed all different stakeholders have different opinions, but in the end it's a political message that the indicators send to have equal strength put to each pillar, to show that we want to show that they're equal, even though for different stakeholder groups that might not be their opinion. So I'd really like to thank you again for moderating. I'd like to thank all of the presenters, Takashi, Craig, and Miriam. And I would like to maybe point out, you made some really good points, but for the interest of time, I just thought it was really interesting and important to note that although your examples were very different, you had very developed context in Asia, you all emphasize the importance of the stakeholder perceptions and the participation of stakeholders to ensure the success and the sustainability over time. And I think that this, and then also how this is brought into policy and how those ideas are brought into policy. So I really think that we could use that as a take-home message from this webinar to bring forward into the future. So I'd like to thank you all again. The recording and the presentations will be made available online, and they'll be circulated with all of the registered participants as soon as they're available. And we hope to see you at another GBEP webinar soon. And I hope you have a good rest of the day. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.